Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Hello, hello?
Hello, Prof.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Fine.
Yeah, so I have to be here because I need to be here. Otherwise, there's an urgent situation that demands my attention. But if you will start with me so that I will make my presentation and then before I go off.
No problem, Prof.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We'll try and do that.
And I also hope that we'll start on time.
Yes, we're starting now. Actually, we're waiting for Professor Adeuti to chair this panel, but because of time, we will not delay. Maybe he will join us and continue from where we stop, actually. So I want to welcome every one of us to this panel, or we call it roundtable because it's actually a celebratory table for Professor Remi Raji. And we had the first panel this afternoon, and it was great. So this is the follow-up of what we had in the afternoon. So I want to quickly go through the biographies of the panelists. Then we come to Professor Igia for his presentation. Then afterward, others will follow suit. Sule Emmanuel Ega is a professor of African literature and cultural studies at Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida University, Lapai, Nigeria. His research interests include intersection of literature and politics in Africa, feminism, cultural studies, and eco-criticism. Fellowship and award, fellowship and award he has privileged benefited from include Passage Writing Fellowship, the Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship, the African Humanity Fellowship, the Humboldt Talent Travel Award. He has written over 100 scholarly articles and literary essays. He is the author of the writing of Zainab Al-Khaleh, 2005, in their Voices and Visions, Conversation with New Nigerian Writers, Poetics of Rage, a reading of Remi Raji's poetry, and others. He is a recipient of the 2013 Commonwealth Book Prize for the African region, and 2009 winner of Anna Gabriel Okara Prize. Prof, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The second panelist we have here is Dr. Sinayon Olaoluwa. Sinayon Olaoluwa is the acting director of the Institute of African Studies, IAS, University of Ibadan. He obtained his MA in English from the University of Ibadan in 2013 and trained for his PhD in African literature at the University of which was done in Johannesburg, South Africa between 2000 to 2009. Olaoluwa was the pioneer coordinator of the program in diaspora and transnational studies in IAS, and has been sub-dean of Editor Institute, editor of the flagship journal of African Notes, and head of the IAS Scientific Committee. His publications have appeared in African Affairs, Journal of African Cultural Studies, Journal of Modern Learning Studies, Critiques, Studies in Contemporary Fiction, and Social Dynamics. His work is locating Anthropocene, the city and oil in Hello Habila Oil and Water. Was ranked in the top 10 publication on social and environmental justice by the Oxford University Press. Prof, you are welcome. Yeah, and another panelist here, Jumoke Rechimon. Jumoke is the author of the 3 books, I Am Memory, The Birth of Illusion, and A Small Silence. Her writing has appeared in various magazines and anthologies, and it has been translated into Italian, French, Norwegian, Macedonian, and other languages. She is completing her PhD in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta in Canada. Okay, you are welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Without wasting time, I will welcome Professor Enya to start his presentation. You are welcome, Prof.
Thank you. How many minutes do I have? We said 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, we'll give you 15 minutes because you want to leave, so we'll add 5 minutes for you.
Okay, thank you. Let me say hello to Jumoke. Jumoke, it's been a while. Senayo, it's good to meet you here also. And I hope the Egbon Remi Raji himself is here. It's an opportunity to be part of this roundtable to celebrate someone that we all know is a very fine poet and also a very good scholar, someone who has inspired us in different ways. And I would like to start from the personal, and then I'll move to my scholarly engagement with his writing. I first met Remi Raji in Makurdi, and incidentally, I am talking from Makurdi, where I am attending a book festival, books and art festival. So I first met Remi Raji here during ANA convention. I can't remember the year, but I think it was a long time ago. And I walked up to him. You know, it was one of those, this was the time that I was just an undergraduate, and then I was just getting to know about ANA and meeting writers, attending ANA convention and all of that. Then I walked up to him and I said, please, I would like to have one of your poetry books. And then he very kindly autographed Webs of Remembrance for me. And then I left with it. And when I went back to my hotel room, I remember vividly that I started reading the poetry collection, and I read deep into the night and even to the early hours of the next day, because I was so enchanted by the work that I felt like I would finish the whole poetry collection before going to bed. And this was how I got to encounter Remi Raji's poetry. And thereafter, I think I began to be in contact with him, and we started exchanging emails, which was, I think, what was possible for us to exchange at that time. Then he sent me more of his collection, especially Webs of Remembrance. There was the one that followed was A Harvest of Laughters, I think he later sent me Harvest of Laughter, which was published before Webs of Remembrance, and then Shuttle Songs America. So at a point, I had these 3 collections. And I went through these 3 collections, and I was enchanted by the sheer poetics of his art. But I was also interested in the way in which he was engaging the Nigerian nation, the idea of nationhood. I mean, the fact that poetry could speak so eloquently about the condition of my country. And this was a time that I was at uni, just an undergraduate or about graduating, and then we were facing all kinds of ASU crisis. And I was reading a lot of Marxist stuff, reading a lot of newspapers, and then there was the movement of the military must go and all of that. So Remi Raji's poetry came to me at a time, or I encountered the poetry at a time that the nation was in a turmoil, and the nation was seriously in need of a democratic order. You know, it had been the military must go, the military must go. We had demonstrations several times on campus, the military, Abacha must go, and all of that. So at this point, I started doing my master's. As soon as I left and I finished my NYC, I got employed as a graduate assistant at National State University. Then I started doing my master's. As soon as I finished my master's, I did master's on Alikalis. As soon as I finished my master's, I said, well, I must do my PhD on Remi Raji's poetry. So to cut the long story short, I met someone who is also a friend to Remi Raji at University of Abuja who agreed to supervise me. And then his name is Professor Boyega Kolawole. And then he supervised my PhD. But as at this time, Remi Raji had published Love Song for My Wasteland. So I had 4 collections with which I began my PhD. And then I started working seriously. But even before I got my PhD underway, I published an article on Remi Raji's Love Song for My Wasteland. And it was an article I wrote just after I finished my PhD, my master's, and I sent it to RAL, Research in African Literatures, and it was published. You know, after a correction, a round of correction, it was published. And it would be like one of the best things that will happen to me, a graduate assistant. Here is a graduate assistant being published in RAL, one of the most prestigious journals in literary studies. And I recall that the late Pius Adesanya wrote me a private email and he praised my article and he was very impressed. And he asked if I would want to come to Canada to do a PhD. But by then I had already registered at Abuja, and I told him that, no, I think I will just do it in Nigeria. And that is how I started my work on Remi Raji. Now, Remi Raji's poetry over the years, I have watched it, I've paid keen attention to it, and I've written quite a number of work. Later on, I will transform my PhD into Poetics of Rage, and I would also write a number of articles, you know, on Remi Raji's poetry. It continues to engage the Nigerian nationhood from a very informed and a very something like a visceral perspective, in which it seems to me that Remi Raji seems to understand the very idea of Nigeria, and he has also theorized, you know, in interviews and in his own in his own scholarly essays, and some of the essays he has written for magazines and other outlets. He has also talked about the idea of connecting poetry to nationalism. And at a point when the Nigerian nation was transforming, and then the military had to go. And when we had IBB stepping aside, and then Abacha coming in, and then later Abacha has to go, and all of that, I have always looked at Remi Raji's poetry as one of as a very important index of that so-called third generation poetry that has an intense reflection and also intense engagement with the Nigerian nation. And in my view, there is no way we can write the history of democratization in Nigeria today without making reference to the poetry of that generation, especially those of them that wrote in the 90s, and they had to write under severe repressive condition, most of them presenting chapbooks, and then some of them reading their poetry in clubs at Ibadan, at Nsukka and other places. And they also started what we call vast journalism, something like newspaper publication and all of that. So in essence, Remi Raji is one of the strongest voices from this generation. And in fact, for me, he is the what you may call the poster face of that generation. And it is on this account that we can, talk about his contribution to literature and to national development. Now, Remi Raji has just published another collection called Wanderer Cantos. My own thinking is that you cannot talk of Remi Raji now without going back to his earlier collections. And it is better to look at his work as a body of poetic response to the condition of Nigeria. I don't know if I have exceeded my time, but this would be what I would say, and then listen to responses about my presentation.
Prof, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
And I want to welcome Professor Remi Raji. And Prof, you're welcome. Then I want to hand over to Professor Bumsola Adeoti, who is the chairman for this session. Prof, you're welcome, sir. Prof, are you there? Prof, can you unmute, please? Okay, maybe we go on to the second presenter. So while we wait for Professor. Oh, okay, Prof, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much. Is the network that is fluctuating here? I've just listened to Professor Egia speaking. Am I to make any comment or after the presentation? Hello?
Stephen,
can you hear me?
Professor Adeoti?
Yeah, I can hear him.
Yeah, so he's asking a question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Prof.
Okay. Am I to make an intervention now, or we wait until all the presentations are taken?
Okay, we wait till all the presentations are taken.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll invite the second presenter, Dr. Sinayola Lua. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the colleagues who have kindly put this together so we may um, share our perspectives, not just on the works of Professor Aderemi Raji Oyelade, uh, but also on his personality. Um, well, Professor Egia has set the tone. What he did was a keynote. That's my sense of it. So, which makes my own task a lot easier. I am only going to say one or two things, and then the celebration continues. My relationship with Professor Raji Oyelade goes back to the 90s, and I do not in any way intend to be in competition with Professor Sulegia. But that is the truth of the matter, because what many people do not know is that Professor Raji Oyelade has taught me across all the three universities I have attended. He had taught me while I was in Nagoye, and described himself then as a member of the Salvation Army, having had to offer so kindly to complete a course in poetry that his colleague, who was ill, his colleague Shesan Ajayi, late now, couldn't complete for us. And you will imagine him traveling all the way from Ibadan to Agoiwe, doing that for us selflessly. And then I came for my master's and he was there. When I did my PhD, and that will shock everybody, at the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Raji came to check on me twice, flying from Nigeria to South Africa just to be sure this boy was doing very well. And you know, that has been the kind of relationship existing between us. And I would like to thank you, sir, once again for making me your boy always. Now, I am, like I said earlier on, going to quickly make a short reflection on the works of Professor Aderemi Raji Oyelade as a poet first, and I'll later come back to the second part of my reflection, which is looking at his work as a theorist. There is a sense in which his work, for me, straddles the domains of nation and cosmopolitanism, or nationalism and cosmopolitanism, in such a way that remains fascinating. Fascinating precisely because theories of cosmopolitanism tend to tell us that the concept, the practice of cosmopolitanism is actually the antithesis of nationalism. But and you begin to wonder, then how can a nationalist also be a cosmopolitan? A quick look at the titles of his works will indicate how he straddles two otherwise impossible spaces, so that when you talk about a harvest of laughter, you also want to talk about webs of remembrance, memory, and all that. And you talk about love song for my wasteland, gather my blood rivers of blood. But you also want to read about Shorty Song's America, that appears to have taken you away from home, you think. And then the same for Wonder Cantos. But by the time you are done with what is apparently nationalistic and what is, you know, as evidently cosmopolitan, you are going to realize that Remi Raji, the poet, or Rem Raj, the poet, has been able to navigate the fine line of, if you like, disjuncture between the two of them, so that rather than foregrounding the disjuncture between nationhood and cosmopolitanism, you find a cosmopolitan who is at once at home with nationalism. And it is in this sense that, you know, this observation resonates with Professor Egia's earlier observations about Remi Raji's poetics and its deep sense of nationalism, its deep sense of commitment to this wasteland, and the poetic and other forms of effort being made to salvage this wasteland. And that's my sense of it. At the other level of my reflection, and I'm rounding up now, I am particularly thrilled by the whole idea of developing a whole concept and theory around post-proverbials. Long before Walter Mignono will tell us that we need theories from the global south. My sense of it is that Professor Remi Raji had started to seize the moment in such a way that will create for Africa and the world new ways of knowing. There is a sense in which, you know, this assumption is evocative of the symbolic impression of Bulawayo's "We Need New Names." More often than not, when it comes to new concepts and practices and theories, Africa tends to wait for the West to invent these concepts, you know, and practices. And then we come back to say, yes, it also exists in Africa. Now, then we generate data to just validate theoretical assumptions from the global north. But by bequeathing to us the idea, the original idea of post-proverbials, we are witnessing the onset of what I call the momentum, the theoretical momentum from Africa, the turn of the 21st century, that's leading, you know, the blooming of new ways of knowing, new theories, new practices that are not only useful for Africa, but are at the same time reflective and evocative of other cultural practices across the world. And it is in this sense that I see his theoretical intervention as one that will play a key role in the way we galvanize ourselves into taking up the challenge of coming up with new ideas, new theories, new postulations without necessarily waiting for the global north. I would like to thank you all.
Prof, thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to invite Jumoke for a presentation.
Good afternoon, good evening, Professor Egia, Professor Senayo, Professor Adeoti. It's good to see everyone again. I'm really glad to be here. And Professor Bolo Adur, thank you so much also for inviting me. My Foundation, which Professor Remi Raji started, and how that was created as a point for mentoring poets who actually were starting out, and this emerged from is the selfless nature, which is reflected in his work, But before I go on to talk about some of the things that the Ibadan Poetry Foundation has done and under its direction, I hope it's okay to read from the Webs of Remembrance, since it's been mentioned like a few times. So I'm going to read the very first poem called Salutation. I come gently like the evening rain. I come in silence like the dews of a virgin morn. I come suddenly like thunder, like the rain at noon, writes of first tuber and leaves to you. All forebears of redolent words. Salute to you who ponder our ways to sunlight. Salute to you who hold petals of songs to the mouth of mortal wrongs. I salute the song, I salute the singer. I salute the patience of people. I salute the craft in immortal songs. I salute the pebbles, I salute the pearls. Give my voice the sonorous strains of bitter colors. Give my voice the slippery depths of colobus babanas. Let my eyes curve into the past, like a sickle in the harvest of gladsome songs. Like my blood draw the picture of things going and coming. I come tenderly like the full moon among gasping stars. I come gently like the evening rain. While this poem gives the impression of just opening the collection, it also reflects the gracious nature of Professor Yelade, and that is reflected in that selfless act of thinking not just about nation in his poem, but also about nationhood regarding the future of creative writing in Nigeria. So when he started the Ibadan Poetry Foundation in 2013, he invited me to be a part of the organization of the foundation. And some of the things that have been achieved, that were achieved and are still ongoing, include the Ibadan Poetry Workshop for Emerging Poets, which was started in year 2016. I remember that Professor Sule Egia was also part of the anthology that was in honor of Professor Niyo Shundari, a commemorative anthology at the time. And there's also the continuous celebration of the World Poetry Day. The last one was earlier this year. So some of those things and some of the writers like Undubisi Martins have gone on to do possibilities for us mentoring younger poets. The foundation also created an opportunity for not just mentoring for mentoring's sake, but mentoring for production and future interaction among younger poets. In all of this, what I'm trying to say is that Professor Raji's sense of nationhood and prophecy is not just reflected as poetry in the written form, but as poetry as action in itself. And that will be the end of my presentation. I'm sorry it's so short, but that is, I just wanted to use that as a medium for also expressing that it's not just in his work as a poet, but his poetry is also is about active participation that goes beyond the written form. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, for the presentation.
Professor Gbemisola Adeoti, Remi Adeoti. Thank you for all the support. I like the idea referring to contributions, not only in writing, but also in action. There are things that we are almost forage, to chart paths for other poets, younger poets who are coming, not just poets, but other writers. So IBPF, maybe this is a new inspiration for us to do more things. Yeah, Shinayo talked about new ways of knowing Africa and the world, through my theory of post-proverbial. I mean, it was a theory that came upon me. I beyond doing oral literature, I didn't do much about understanding some of these cultural artifacts, living speech artifacts. But it seems to me that somebody needed to name a phenomenon, that has been associated with the ways we think, the way we talk, the way we change things since primary and secondary school. And instead of waiting for somebody to name it from the West, it came upon me, and surprisingly, it has been well accepted. And so you call it a theory. I hope new generation of scholars will do more work in that. Incidentally, we're having a conference in November around the theory of post-proverbials. Sule Egia has worked in that area also. I think he has published an essay in that area. So I would, apart from our poet, because there's a very thin line between, for the average African scholar who is also blessed with the faculty for creative writing, there is a very thin line between creativity and criticism. My teacher, Emeritus Professor Dan Izebaye, quoting F.W. Bateson, will say that criticism and creativity are two sides of the same coin, discourse. It's a very standard question, that creativity and criticism are two sides of the same coin. It's more like having two wings as a bird. It's unlike in other climes where you can only be one. You can only be a critic or you can only be a poet. So I always have that kind of dilemma when I go to the West America and Europe to read, and then I'm introduced just as a Nigerian poet. And I say, I'm not just a Nigerian poet. I don't want to be seen just as a poet. I want to be seen either as a poet and scholar or as a scholar poet, because there is something about it that diminishes the critical faculty when you are just introduced as a poet. And then what comes into the mind of that foreign audience is somebody who is coming to jump and dance on stage to do spoken poetry. Just recently, I was sent a mail. I was invited to give a star performance at the 7th Conference of African Studies in Pesh, about 200 kilometers away from Budapest in Hungary. And one of the people I was in contact with said, yeah, they're expecting me that I should bring along my drums. It was a nice way of saying that I'm still a member of that privileged and primitive community that comes as only can speak English and can write in English. So I said, well, the only drums I have are in my memory, they are in my mind, and I wish to bear my mind when I come. So my drums are in my mind. So we have the duty as scholars to understand that we need constantly to reinvent the idea of what a scholar is, an African scholar is in the New World. An African scholar should be able to interpret and reinterpret that which is familiar to him or her and that which is also strange, without losing the fact that both creative and critical faculty are possible to contain in one single body. That is a crisis of identity that I have had. Professor Niyokoye said earlier in the morning that, oh yes, I'm Remi Raji as poet, and I'm also seen as a scholar. I'm called Remi Raji Oyelade. But I think it's possible to collapse both. And I'm sure that people like GRA, Remi Raji, people like Jumoke Beresimo, people like Shola Oloriyomi will understand what I'm talking about, that you can be poet and also be professor in the real sense of the term. For this, I must thank you for your interventions, your various interventions, and also to thank you for letting me know that we've come a long way. After 1990, 2003, 2016, 2006, and so on and so forth. It's a very good thing, very good feeling. And of course, we had to do this after all that world are able to do our thoughts. We've survived in spite of all odds. So I thank you very much. I thank you once again. And I also thank the audience, the attendees who are just on the sideline, and I hope that questions will come within the little time we have left. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that reflection. I want to invite Professor Bimba Beauty for his comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Stephen, can you hear me?
Very well, Prof.
Yeah. Once again, I want to commend you for putting this together. What we are celebrating today is what I see as triumph of friendship, triumph of mentorship, and of course, triumph of artistic talent of Professor Remi Raji. I've known him since I think 1993, and he's been more of an elder brother and a mentor. So when I was contacted to be part of this, I gladly gave my consent. I want to commend Professor Egia, Professor Shenayon Olaoluwa, and Jumoke for the incisive insights that they have provided into different dimensions of Remi Raji's creativity. Egia has been able to emphasize the political topicality in Remi Raji's poetry. And if you take a collection like A Harvest of Laughter, or the second one, Webs of Remembrance, you will see the heavy political consciousness that Remi Raji has infused in his poetry. People have talked about these love songs, but I want to call attention to one aspect of this session, which also deserves attention, and that is the poet as a prophet. The poet as someone who speaks not only to the past and present, but somebody who speaks to the future. Remi Raji is able to do this using metaphors, images that are somehow timeless, that are somehow universal in realizing a poetry that is not only relevant to the present, but also speaks to the future. And so, reading some of the poems, though they were written about 2 decades ago, but the feeling you sometimes get is that the man is writing for the moment. And that is one thing that I find fascinating in the poetic art of Remi Raji. Let me, with your permission, read one or two of such poems that I found prophetic. Let's take a song for bandits, for instance, from Webs of Remembrance. This collection won 21 years ago, and Nigeria had not degenerated into what it is today. See what is Remi Raji has to say 21 years ago about today's Nigeria. And the fathers of secrets cast a spell into future eyes. All they see is deceit, sister of lies. When the hour of hunger descends on the homestead, then the farmer talks of rains long expected. When the hour of hunger descends on the homestead, then the hunters dream and sing of fertile traps. The king's men mumble an abundance of promise when famished children howl through empty nights. Planter of laughter, singer at dawn, I watch some tragic air training on my stubborn cheeks. All alone, I make my journeys in tune with the multitude of winds. I have seen the indelible marks of rogues and repeats on the lonely maps of virgin roads. I've heard the windy complaints of bands left in the bloody mercy of pleasant bandits. They who live in underbelly of forgeries will count their profits in the forge of pain. The child who gathers imaginary sticks snail will have a supper in a dream of meat, of suspended meat. What does it count for this wastefulness? These mural bones in the decaying museum of memory. What does it all count? A gallery of goons, a clown of clowns, a circus of seasoned cannibals. I wince in sleep at the pogroms of dreams and the smell of bandits threatening the air. The smell of bandits rule the land. Bandits become the smell above the law, and bandits become the land. Isn't he talking about today's Sampara, Sokoto, Owo, Okyogun, Igagan, and so on and so forth? Okay. Even if you consider the and the poet foresees a death. Okay. It's still in the same spirit of speaking to the future, and I think we some critics can also look at this dimension so that we have a more robust understanding of Remi Raji's poetry. One other thing that fascinates me about Remi Raji as a poet is that, unlike some of the first and second generation of poets, he is somebody who does not only stop at writing, especially in terms of offering leadership at different cadres. He also goes out to show that yet you can be a poet, but you can intervene in the affairs of your community, of your society, offer leadership and make a difference. And in him, I find a mentor. Okay, if you look at his trajectory, he has served the system. He doesn't just stop criticizing the system, talking about its inadequacy, but he comes in to show that there is a lot you can realize for the system and solve some of these problems rather than complaining about them. That's why he served as sub-dean, head of department, later as HOD, and he offered to serve at the highest level of governance in the university system. This is a difference that I find very significant, not only for him, but also for the generation in his attempts to make a mark among within his own generation. So I'm going to conclude by challenging all of us that Remi Raji has served as a mentor to us. He has served as a model. And I think in our own little ways, we can begin, we can continue to reproduce these ideas, regenerate these ideas, and also use some of his style, his values in our attempts not only to mentor younger generation of critics and writers, but also in extending the family of Remi Raji Poetics. Once again, I want to thank the speakers for that intense dissection of Remi Raji's poetry. And once again, the man at the center, and that is Stephen Boluwadro. It's quite a huge effort that he has put into making this a reality. Thank you very much.
Prof, thank you so much for your intervention. We have just 3 minutes left, but we have 1 or 2 questions here that I will quickly read out for Professor Raji to comment on. And the first one says, it appears that Sule, Ege, and Sinayon Laluwa description of Raji's poetry captures what Mbembe has called the Afropolitan instinct in African writing. I wonder what Raji thinks about the notion of Afropolitanism.
Well, I must thank my friend, Chileziana, for that very important question. And the very good response to that is that you can see that you cannot see me. I'm responding to you in pitch darkness. And that tells you much about the reality of being Afropolitan, in quotes. Well, the idea of Afropolitanism way back in the just about the end of the 20th century, for me, I see it as the expression of African identity in the cosmopolis, or shall we say African identities, shuttling in the New World, shuttling across the world. And so describing my poetry as capturing the Afropolitan instincts in African writing is not too far away from the reality of my existence and my consciousness, having shuttled, from one end of the world to the other, even before the term Afropolitanism, came into reckoning. We have been involved in Afropolitan shuttles, trying to express our African identities across cultures, across countries, across continents, and trying to prove that there is something worthy of understanding the modernist consciousness of the African writer of English expression. English expression, not meaning that you borrow hook, line, and sinker from English poetry, but using English as just the medium of conveying the heritage, knowledge, or the essence of your African identity. So yeah, I think that's true. So I will agree with that. Thank you very much, Chiloze. Yes.
So I'm sorry, everybody. We still have like 30 minutes to go. I was actually looking at different timing here. So we have another question here from, okay, for Prof. So Inca's poetry is influenced by the Bible, Joseph, for example. Sophistan's drama is influenced by Sophocles. Achebe's fiction is influenced by yeast. My question, what are the factors and writers that influence the poetry of Remi Raji?
I don't know. I don't know how we come to that. I don't know how we come to the point of agreement that Soyinka's poetry was influenced only by the Bible, or that Oshobi's is only influenced by Sophocles. If you read more about tradition and individual talents, you know that one single influence cannot be the sole determinant of the development of a writer, of a poet. And of course, there is also from T.S. Eliot's work derived tradition and the Yoruba writer. So the influences are always variegated. The influences are always numerous. They're always a hybrid of influences. Maybe I should put it this way. The influences for Remi Raji's poetry transcend that of Soyinka, connected to Oshofison, to Achebe, and to Oshundare, goes back to the poetry of Aiching, of Pablo Neruda, of Amika Yehuda, and even beginning with the poetry of my family. I come from the famed Adigboro family, the masquerade Adigboro family. And it goes back to the poetry of my grandmothers. So there's no one single influence I can derive. I'm going to leave that to the likes of Imam Sule to tease out the influences of Remi Raji, but not just one single. But the good thing is that you ask what are the factors I've mentioned. They are not just only Nigerian, but they're also European, they're American, they're South American, they're Chinese, they're Indian, going back to Rabindranath Tagore and Rumi, the Persian poet. I've derived a lot of influence from this, because the best way you can do good writing is to do vast reading. So these are my influences. They are a legion. Legion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. There's a question here. The most compelling demonstration of Remi Raji's tendency to be cosmopolitan, as Professor Sinaya theorizes, in the poem Shuttle Song America and Wanderer Cantos. Again, can we also think of Remi Raji as a cosmopolitan poet beyond the spaces, physical or theme he applies in time of all those, but in the cosmopolitanist notion of hybrid politicization of style, Yoruba folk motifs, and stylistic experimentation drawn from other Western cultures?
Yeah, that's Sundubusi. I think Sundubusi will be right. The same thing you should just do is to remove the question mark. Once you remove the question mark and you turn the sentences around, I think you will be perfect, you'll be correct. Yeah, it's interesting that Senayo talks about that. You're also saying that the ones that are more cosmopolitan are Shortu Songs America and Wanderer Cantos. Maybe because they are travel. The whole of Shortu Songs is travel poetry, and of course, travel poetry was not a form that I wanted at the time I produced Shortu Songs America. It was because my camera failed. That was what made Shortu Songs America possible. I didn't plan to write a collection of poems for my trip, my first trip to America in 1999, but because the camera that I used to take pictures from Kalamazoo in Michigan, through Battle Creek, through Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the rest, Indianapolis to Washington to Utah, about 10 states in 6 weeks, the camera failed and I had to depend on memory to capture all those places that I've been to. That was how the travel poet.
Hello, Prof. Please,
Hello?
Professor Adeoti, please, can you help
Yes.
us unmute?
Okay. On mute, yes. Hello? Hello?
Hello, Prof. Can you help us mute your speaker, please?
Okay. You said on mute.
Mute, rather, please, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Okay, I have this for the panelists while we waiting for Professor Remi Raji. I don't know, Professor Remi Raji mentioned somewhere that corrupt leaders don't read poems. And I wonder how his political interventions, his prophecies, which are interlocked in his poetry, will get to the primary constituency of people that actually need this kind of intervention or that could use their personality to turn around the issues around the country. So can we engage with that, please?
Hello, if I'm coming here, can you hear me, Steve?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, basically, my sense of it is that even when happiness in the country tend to leave us in a state of quandary and hopelessness, the nature of poetry and the arts generally is such that they survive social tumults and eventually get projected into the consciousness of the people. Call it national consciousness, communal consciousness, or whatever name you want to call it. And for as long as we have that understanding about what I call the infinitude of artistic value, the same leaders who aren't going to listen to poetry today, let alone take instruction from it, will tomorrow, in the process of what I call political evolution, do exactly that. at other times, and I'm drawing now from an aspect of the oral poetic genre of my own people, the Ogu people of Lagos and Ogun State in Nigeria, and if you like, stretch into some parts of the Republic of Benin, to Ghana and to Togo. Now, there is this narrative about an authoritarian king who wanted a section of his kingdom decimated, eliminated, I mean, completely. And so they came to the conclusion that one way of going about it was to ask members of that, if you like, rebel, go and produce a kind of golden wardrobe. A twine made of mud, and it will endure. And in any case, for the, how is that possible? Maybe you can make an art of a mud art, I mean, in form of a chain. But to use that same chain for binding becomes problematic, of course, because of the certainty of breaking into pieces. And so the young men, of course, who were the face, or who were the arrowheads of rebellion, also the king thought, then rushed back in quandary to an elder in their own community to say, now this is what the king has asked us to do. Produce a mud twine. It is very clear that the king wants us dead, because this is not possible, especially if you must produce it and have it to bind stuff. So the elder smiled and said, you know what? Why not go back to the king and tell him, Your Excellency, may you live long. We are prepared to produce this mud twine, but kindly give us an older mud twine, because it is onto the old twine that the new one will be woven. That became a conundrum for the king himself, and in anger, he chased the entire community. In any case, that was his ultimate vision. That happened, right? But in my people's cosmology today, that poetic wisdom persists, that it is onto the old twine that a new one is woven, which speaks to the primacy, the imperative of always reflecting on history, going back in order to move forward. And so, even when the king then wouldn't listen, subsequent generations would take that seriously. And that is, for us, what is important here. The contemporary Nigerian society, or the leadership system in Nigeria, may not be interested in the wisdom of our poetry, in the wisdom of arts generally, but the infallible assumptions and assertions of our arts will survive this period of depredation we're experiencing. And ultimately, the future generations will be at one with the artistic wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jumoke, do you have anything to say about that?
No, I don't actually.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Prof, you're welcome back. So the question with you're asking is that you said corrupt politicians don't read poetry. So we're asking then how does your prophecy, your engagement get to the core where it is actually needed most? Can you unmute, bro?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, we started thinking that poetry is a scholarly medium, and that it's that poetry is a scholarly medium, and essentially we treat it as a material for scholarship beyond or not, I mean, just within the square of our discipline. But then what we have done, you know, writers, poets of English expression or of modern African poetry per se, what we try to do is that we enroll or we appropriate the function of the traditional griot. We appropriate the function of the original court poets who sings in praise and at the same time lambasts bad leadership where they find one, and they make jest of leadership and they praise leadership at the same time. Because the court poet does not just praise. Even in jest, he also criticizes. So what the typical modern African poet, shall I say the modern Nigerian poet does, is to borrow those functions, to take those functions, to appropriate those functions and use in order to be relevant in the new age. But then something comes as a wedge in between the poet, the author, and the authority, and that is language. The quality of your poetry will be determined by the language that you are able to use to reach the largest population, not necessarily even the authority that does not read. It is not that that some of the members of the authority, the enlightenment, are not, it's not that they are not enlightened, but they are too busy embezzling, they are too busy, you know, siphoning money, they are too busy taking all the resources for them to even indulge in the luxury of reading. But there are others around them who probably will point at the dangers, at the criticism of the poet when they are able to read them. You know, take for instance, even the Yoruba poets, poets using Igbo language, poets using Hausa language, do they even listen to them? But as long as we have a larger percentage of people, the people on the streets, as long as we have a larger percentage of the people, the commoners, the people in the villages, through their children who are able to understand what we are talking about, it may take a longer time for poetry, English poetry or poetry written in English to catch up with the foibles, with the immorality of leadership, or with the irresponsibility of bad leadership. Yet we must not relent as poets. We must not forsake the medium. We must continue. Again, the typical African poet, the typical Nigerian poet is an endangered species because all the major awards, everybody wants to write novel. Everybody wants to write a collection of short stories. But that is where the money is. That is where the awards come from. There are very few awards left for poets. In my days as a young poet, writing under Oshundare, Okpewu, Arigaruba, we were told that poetry was the king of all the genres. But it's more like in these days, we might have been scammed, believing that poetry is king of all genres. The novel, as a social text, has taken on that mantle that you begin to wonder, why can't I also write the novel? So that's why even some of my colleagues who are poets are migrating, so to say, to becoming novelists. Of course, we write novels, we write short stories and all of that, but I want to be recognized, to be known more as a poet, because there's something immediate, there's something original, there's something much more passionately true about you as author if you say that you are a poet, because poetry makes all things possible or impossible, depending on what you think of it. So the authority that does not understand the vital imagery of your poetry today is in danger, because there are those who understand the vital poetry, the vital images, those who understand it, and those who will be influenced as we go on. The words may not mean now. The poems I wrote 20 years ago begin to mean even more. When Professor Adeoti called me some time ago, and I think he has read one of the poems, and he asked me frontally whether I had anything in mind when I was writing about bandits. I wrote a poem for bandits. I wrote a poem for bandits in 1999, 2001. That's almost 20 years ago. I didn't know how those words came, but they came. And then I hope that people read through and then they understand it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Yeah.
Do we still have any questions from the audience, please? Okay. Prof, reflecting on your poem in okay. Wanderers, Cantors,
Yeah.
the train about the Fakafiki poem, and I guess you actually talking about giving out a warning about the incursion of Chinese into African economy. And can you expatiate on that?
About what? Come again, please.
About Chinese incursion into African economy. And I guess trying to repeat kind of Western colonization all over again in Africa.
Okay, I mean, you are referring to that poem.
Yeah, that poem, exactly, yes.
The poem about the Mandarin song.
Yeah.
That is, I've forgotten the title really. Something about there's a train crossing through our land.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I remember exactly the very first line, line I put paper. Precisely, I think September of 2018, in a resort in South Africa, in Pretoria, South Africa. 54 African presidents of African nations were being invited to Peking, to Beijing by the Chinese president. Don't forget that China is a country. Now, the leader of the Chinese government was inviting 54 African leaders to a summit on economic development of Africa. After Africa had experienced multiple exploitation and colonial rape over the decades, now China is creating another empire on the African continent, and then they're inviting all African leaders to what they call FOCAC. FOCAC means the Forum of China and Africa Relations, where China will be a partisan part, and the whole of Africa, divided into 54 parts, will also be a partisan part. And for me, that is a clear declaration, a willing declaration of self as slave before a new Mandarin master. And I felt that it needed to be dealt with. But of course, it was not a popular point that I raised at that particular conference in South Africa. But once you are convinced about your opinion, the best way is for me to retrieve or to retreat from being a scholar, writing and quoting other scholars, to becoming a poet, expressing my opinion, my own, from my own poetic, from region of my mind that is poetic, to write about it. And over time, a number of people now have begun to understand where I'm coming from. It was just about the same time that I traveled to Uganda, to Tanzania, to Kenya, part of Congo, to see how much influence China has had in a whole region of Africa, and then they are still having it in West Africa, maybe not in North America, but East, West, Central, and South have been taken up, by a new form of colonization, a more benign kind of colonization, which is Mandarin, which is Chinese. I felt I should write about it, but the joke is on us. The critique in that particular poem was not even against China. The critique is against the African leaders who submitted themselves who willingly, not just submitted themselves, but led most of us, African citizens, into a lopsided contract with the Chinese nation. And it's something, and I called it, well, of course, I linked it with the idea of the train, whether locomotive or electric, or whatever comes in the way of a train, you know what happens to it. So it's more like a new bulwark of colonialism that we're experiencing in Africa. And it is everywhere. In Nigeria now, it is there. Perhaps I should end by asking anyone who has an account with a particular bank that is connected to South Africa and South Africa and Nigeria. I don't want to mention the name of that bank, but if you go to that particular bank that has South African interest in Nigeria, or that has Nigerian interest in South Africa, and you go to the ATM, you have two languages to pick from, Chinese and English. That's an ATM, and they are coming gradually. And I asked whether the court of poets is asleep, whether our critics are not aware, whether our economists are not aware. But because they do, and that's why I'm beginning to even get more, not just only into performance poetry, but into video poetry. It seems like this generation is much more tactile, is much more visual. Rather than using words, we need to begin to use pictures, to begin to write picture poetry for people to see that there's work at hand. We need to change the dynamics of what makes us African in a new world. Thank you.
Prof, thank you so much. You are on point and on time. Thank you so much. I want to appreciate everyone who have helped us to make this panel worthwhile. Thank you to Professor Adeoti, Professor Senayo, Jumoke, and all the panelists. We thank all the attendees for taking time out to be with us. And again, Prof, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for everything. So thank you all. And we definitely we'll get back to the panelists. Going forward from here, we believe that this conversation will not end here, but we definitely take it up from here. Thank you, everyone. A good night.